Los Angeles, March 1992. Record Plant Studios was buzzing with energy on a Tuesday afternoon. Whitney Houston was at the absolute peak of her career. I Will Always Love You had just hit #1. The Bodyguard soundtrack was breaking sales records worldwide, and every music executive in Hollywood wanted to be in her orbit. But what happened in Studio B that day would remind everyone that behind the glamorous superstar was still that Newark church girl who never forgot where she came from. If you love untold stories about Whitney Houston's strength and character, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Whitney was working on vocal arrangements for her next album when Marcus Goldstein arrived. Marcus was a senior vice president at Atlantic Records, a man who controlled budgets, decided which artists got promoted, and had the power to make or break careers. He was also known for his sharp tongue and his belief that power gave him the right to say whatever he wanted to, whoever he wanted. Marcus had been drinking at an industry lunch, not enough to be obviously drunk, but enough to lower his inhibitions, enough to make him think he was funnier than he actually was. He walked into the studio like he owned it, flanked by two junior executives who laughed at everything he said. Whitney Houston. Marcus's voice boomed across the studio. The voice of America. How's our golden girl doing? Whitney looked up from the piano where she'd been working through chord progressions. She knew Marcus by reputation, had heard stories about his ruthless business practices and his tendency to humiliate people for sport. Hello, Marcus, Whitney said politely. I'm doing well, thank you. Marcus surveyed the studio, taking in the expensive equipment, the team of musicians, the atmosphere of creative energy. This is quite a setup you've got here. Must cost Atlantic a fortune to keep you happy. I wouldn't know, Whitney replied. My management handles those details. But something else was bothering Marcus. Something about the Houston family that he'd been hearing rumors about for months. Whitney's brother Gary was also trying to make it in the music business, had been working as a backup singer, had even released a few singles that went nowhere. Marcus walked closer to Whitney's piano, his voice getting louder, making sure everyone in the studio could hear him. You know, Whitney, I've been thinking about your family situation. Must be tough being the only talented one in the bunch. Whitney's fingers stopped moving on the piano keys. The studio went quiet. Musicians looked up from their instruments. Engineers turned away from their mixing boards. Everyone could sense that something was shifting in the room. I'm sorry. What did you say? Whitney asked, her voice perfectly calm. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Your brother Gary, I heard his last single sold, what, maybe 2,000 copies? That's gotta hurt. Watching his little sister become the biggest star in the world while he can't even get radio play in Newark. Whitney stood up from the piano bench, her full height making her presence even more commanding. Marcus, I think you should be careful about what you say next. But Marcus was enjoying himself now, feeding off the attention, the nervousness he was creating. I mean, think about it from his perspective. Here you are, Grammy winner, movie star, making millions, and there's Gary, still playing backup singer gigs at church functions. That's got to eat at a man's soul. One of Whitney's backup singers, a woman who'd known the Houston family for years, whispered, "Oh no," under her breath. Whitney's producer, David Foster, tried to intervene. Marcus, maybe we should focus on the music. No, let me finish, Marcus cut him off. I bet Gary lies awake at night wondering why God gave all the talent to his sister, wondering what he did wrong, wondering if he'll spend his whole life known only as Whitney Houston's brother. That kind of resentment, that kind of jealousy, it's like poison. It kills you from the inside. What Marcus said next would haunt the studio for years to come. Honestly, if I were Gary, I'd probably drink myself to death rather than live in Whitney's shadow. At least then people might remember me for something. The studio went completely silent. So silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Whitney stood perfectly still, her face showing no emotion whatsoever. Marcus realized he might have gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. What? I'm just being honest. That's probably what's going through his mind every day. Whitney walked slowly toward Marcus. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just steadily. Her voice when she spoke was quieter than it had been before. Marcus, I'm going to give you exactly one chance to take back what you just said about my brother. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced now. Take it back? Why? It's the truth, isn't it? The truth? Whitney's voice got even quieter. The truth is that Gary Houston is one of the most talented singers I know. The truth is that he taught me how to harmonize when I was 8 years old. The truth is that he's been my biggest supporter since day one of my career. The truth is that he's never shown one moment of jealousy or resentment, only pride and love. Marcus shrugged. That's sweet, Whitney, but come on. You really think? I'm not finished. Whitney's words cut through the air like a blade. The truth is that Gary chooses to live his life out of the spotlight because he values his privacy and his family more than fame. The truth is that he's a better man than you could ever hope to be. And the truth is that you just revealed more about your own character than you did about his. Marcus's face reddened. Listen, Whitney, I don't know who you think you're talking to, but I know exactly who I'm talking to. I'm talking to a man who thinks power gives him the right to be cruel. I'm talking to someone who makes jokes about other people's families because he enjoys causing pain. I'm talking to a coward who picks on people who aren't here to defend themselves. The studio was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Marcus's two associates looked like they wanted to disappear. David Foster was staring at Whitney in amazement. No one had ever seen her like this. Not angry, not emotional, just absolutely, devastatingly calm. Now, Whitney continued, you have two choices. You can apologize right now for what you said about my brother, or you can explain to everyone in this room why you think it's acceptable to suggest that someone should drink themselves to death. Marcus tried to maintain his composure. Whitney, you're overreacting. I was just making conversation. Conversation? Whitney's eyebrows raised slightly. You call suggesting that my brother should kill himself a conversation? I didn't say he should kill himself. I said if I were him. You said if you were Gary, you'd drink yourself to death rather than live in my shadow. Those were your exact words. Everyone in this room heard you. Marcus looked around the studio. Every face was staring at him, waiting for his response. These were musicians, engineers, producers, people who would work with both Whitney and him for years to come, people who would remember this moment. Look, maybe I phrased it badly. Maybe you did, so rephrase it. Apologize. Marcus's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by artists. Even superstars usually treated executives with deference, with respect born of necessity. I don't apologize for speaking honestly about industry realities. Whitney nodded slowly. I see. So you're standing by what you said. I'm standing by the fact that it must be difficult for your brother. Stop. Whitney held up one hand. Don't say another word about Gary. You've already said too much. She walked back to the piano, sat down on the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. David, please ask Mr. Goldstein and his associates to leave the studio. Marcus's face went red. Excuse me? Whitney didn't look up from the piano. You heard me. This is my session, my studio time, and I don't want you here. Whitney, you can't just... Now Whitney did look up, and something in her eyes made Marcus take a step backward. I can and I am. You disrespected my family. You made cruel, heartless comments about my brother. You refused to apologize, so now you leave. Marcus looked around the room for support, but found none. David Foster was already moving toward the door. The musicians were pointedly looking at their instruments. His own associates were backing toward the exit. This isn't over, Whitney. Whitney's fingers began playing the opening notes of I Will Always Love You, but slower, more haunting than the recorded version. Yes, Marcus, it is. Marcus and his people left the studio. The heavy door closed behind them with a solid thunk. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the backup singers started clapping. Then another musician joined in. Soon the entire studio was applauding, not for a performance, but for what they had just witnessed. Whitney kept playing, her voice joining the piano in a version of the song that was more powerful, more emotional than anything they had recorded before. It was as if defending Gary had unlocked something in her voice, some deeper well of passion and strength. When the song ended, David Foster spoke first. Whitney, that was incredible. Both what you just sang and what you just did. Whitney closed the piano lid. Gary is my brother. He's family. Nobody talks about my family that way. Over the next few hours, word of what happened spread through the music industry like wildfire. By evening, every major label executive in Los Angeles had heard the story. By the next morning, it was being whispered about in Nashville, New York, and London. The story changed depending on who told it. Some versions had Whitney screaming at Marcus. Others claimed she threatened him. But the musicians who were actually there told the truth. Whitney never raised her voice, never lost control, never threatened anyone. She just stood up for her brother with a quiet strength that was more powerful than any tantrum could have been. 3 days later, Whitney received a phone call at home. It was Gary. "Whit, I heard what happened at the studio." "Gary, thank you." His voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for me. You're my brother, that's what family does." Not everyone's family. Not everyone would risk their career to defend someone who wasn't even there. Whitney sat down on her couch, looking out the window at the Hollywood Hills. "Risk my career? Gary, defending you didn't risk anything. It just reminded everyone what matters most. Still, what you did, the way you handled it, Mama would be proud." Whitney smiled at the mention of their mother, Sissy Houston. "Mama taught us that family comes first. Always. She also taught us about dignity, about handling ourselves with class even when other people don't." "Yeah, she did." They talked for another 20 minutes about family, about music, about everything except Marcus Goldstein. Because Gary was right. Their mother had taught them about dignity, about not giving cruel people more attention than they deserved. But the industry didn't forget. 2 weeks later, Marcus Goldstein found himself on the receiving end of some unexpected consequences. Artists started declining meetings with him. Producers found excuses to work with other executives. His own assistants began looking for jobs elsewhere. The problem wasn't that people were actively boycotting Marcus. It was that the story had revealed something about his character that made people uncomfortable. If he could be that cruel about Whitney Houston's brother, what might he say about their families, their struggles, their personal lives? A month after the studio incident, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his office. Whitney Houston's manager had called to set up a meeting. Marcus assumed Whitney wanted to make peace, maybe apologize for embarrassing him. He was wrong. Whitney walked into his office wearing a simple black dress, no jewelry except small diamond earrings. She looked like she was attending a business meeting, which in a way she was. "Marcus, thank you for seeing me." "Whitney, I wasn't sure you'd want to meet after what happened." Whitney sat down across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I'm listening." "I've been thinking about that day in the studio, about what you said about Gary." "Look, Whitney, if you came here for an apology—" "I didn't." Whitney's voice was calm, measured. "I came to give you one." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry. I want to apologize for how I handled the situation, for embarrassing you in front of your colleagues, for throwing you out of the studio." Marcus was confused but trying not to show it. "Okay. I should have pulled you aside privately, should have explained why your comments were hurtful instead of making a scene. That wasn't professional." "No, it wasn't." Whitney nodded. "You're right, and I'm sorry for that." Marcus started to relax. Maybe this would work out after all. Maybe Whitney Houston was going to back down, make nice, smooth things over. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something." "What's that?" Whitney's voice didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "While I regret how I handled the situation, I don't regret defending my brother, not for 1 second. And if anyone ever speaks about Gary or any member of my family the way you did that day, I'll do exactly the same thing again." Marcus stared at her. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. The difference is, next time I'll handle it more professionally. I'll have the conversation privately, but the outcome will be the same. I will defend my family, and the person attacking them will be asked to leave." Whitney stood up. "Thank you for your time, Marcus. I hope we understand each other." She was almost to the door when Marcus called after her. "Whitney, wait." She turned back. "About your brother, I may have been out of line." Whitney studied his face. "You may have been." Marcus shifted in his chair. "I was out of line. What I said was cruel and unnecessary. Yes, it was. I'm... I apologize. Whitney nodded once. Thank you. Gary's a good man, Marcus. If you ever take the time to meet him properly, you'll see that. Maybe I will. Whitney left Marcus's office feeling like she'd accomplished what she came to do. Not to make peace. Peace hadn't been broken as far as she was concerned. She'd simply defended her family and made it clear she'd do it again if necessary. The story of what happened in Record Plant Studios became part of Whitney Houston legend, not because it showed her as a diva or a fighter, but because it revealed the depth of her loyalty and the strength of her character. Years later, Gary Houston would tell interviewers that the studio incident was one of the most important moments in their relationship as siblings. Whitney didn't have to do what she did, Gary said in a 1998 interview. She was at the height of her career. She could have just let it slide, could have avoided the confrontation. But she stood up for me because that's who she was. Family meant everything to her. Musicians who were in the studio that day still talk about it. They remember not just what Whitney said, but how she said it. The calm certainty in her voice, the way she never lost control, never stooped to Marcus's level, but made her point more powerfully than any screaming could have. The incident marked a turning point in how Whitney was perceived in the industry. She'd always been respected for her talent, but after the studio confrontation, she gained a different kind of respect. The kind reserved for people who have clear principles and the courage to stand by them. Marcus Goldstein never made another comment about the Houston family. Some people said it was because he was afraid. Others believed he'd learned from it. For Whitney, the incident reminded her who she was underneath the fame. She was the Newark church girl raised to protect family and stand up for what was right. That's what made Whitney Houston special. Not just her voice, but loyalty, her principles, her refusal to let fame change her. Woman who put family first.